Welcome. My name is Ron Ahrens. I'm the session manager for this session, which is session number 1449, the JGS Leadership Seminar, Part 1. Before I turn it over to Ken Bravo, I ask that if you have any questions, you put your questions into the Q&A area, which is just to the right of the word chat, and then Ken will ask those questions after each of the speakers finishes their presentation. Ken?
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for your help. This is our JGS management session. The idea of these sessions, and we have one that follows this one after a 15-minute break, if you're interested in that one also, is to provide information for our JGS presidents, board members, and leadership on things they can use in running their Jewish genealogical societies. We're going to start off this morning with Brad Orsini. After his service as a captain in the U.S. Marine Corps, Brad was an FBI agent, ending his career in Pittsburgh in 2016. And he is now a senior national security advisor for Secure Community Network, which is the organization that provides safety and security to the Jewish organizations in the United States and Canada under the auspices of the Jewish Federations of North America and the Conference of Major Jewish Organizations. Brad, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Ken. It's a pleasure to be with you all this morning. Just give me 1 second. I just want to pop up a short PowerPoint presentation. Folks, I am in charge right now of helping Jewish communities across the United States in North America facilitate all their security needs. And really what that means is we want to make sure that all our communal security groups, all our organizations, and every Jew across North America has a place to go to obtain security resources, to help their organizational events out. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Honestly, I spent a little over 28 years in the FBI. A large portion of that time for me was a crisis manager. And so, unfortunately, I've been to way too many mass casualty events, to include the First World Trade Center in the mid-90s, 9/11, kidnappings, mass shootings at a mall, mass shootings in a school stabbings. And what we're going to talk about today is things to hopefully mitigate an attack, first and foremost, but also to give you the resources to go to help you secure one of your events, whether it's online. We're going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity. And then when we all come out of this COVID world that we're living in, what does security look like in one of our events? And I understand that a lot of folks out there rent space, goes to different locations. And so really, I'm going to go through a PowerPoint in just 10, 15 minutes, but I really want you to understand where these resources are. Secure Community Network now, there's a group of probably a little over 50 professional security advisors and directors in communities across North America. When I was hired in January of 2017, I was the 19th security director. We're over 50 right now. So what I'd like you to be able to do is take the resources that I'm going to provide. They're going to be available. I'm going to throw a lot of information at you real quick. I'll give you my email. If anybody is going to conduct an event, if they want some help, guidance to help facilitate, to make the most secure event possible, reach out to me. We are happy to help at SCN, whether it's myself or one of the countless numbers of colleagues that I have. But I will tell you, our group, Secure Community Network, we have retired FBI agents. We have retired Secret Service agents. We have retired chiefs of police. We have professionals from all ranks of law enforcement across the country and in Canada to really look at best practices. So today is really a talk about best practices and how to keep ourselves safe and secure. And so with that, I don't need to go into any detail with why security is so important. I will tell you, when I joined Secure Community Network and I started a communal security platform in Pittsburgh, the only time our community ever really thought about security for our events was high holidays. That has changed. And I think every one of you out there needs to think about security prior to having an event. And I can't give you a magic pill to keep everybody safe, but what I can tell you is it's about preparedness. And the only thing we truly have under our control is how well we prepare our community. And that really dovetails into developing a security plan for any one of our events, whether it's reduced in writing, and sharing that with law enforcement and making sure that all our participants at any one of our events know that we're thinking about security and we have security measures in place. So I encourage you all to think like you're the captain of the airplane before you have an event, and they all come over and make those announcements. They give you kind of how to put the seatbelt on, what to do in case of a violent landing, right? We work with our clergy, with our rabbis and our cantors across the country. We're trying to implement those same procedures at that level to give awareness to our congregants that are sitting there ready to pray on what to do in case something bad happens. It's the same for you folks. And we really need to take that posture in our community because we have been attacked. Unfortunately, over the last 2 years, we've suffered in America 4 attacks, separate different attacks that killed members of our community. So we need to take this serious. It's not just the rise in anti-Semitism, which it is rising, folks. And even in the fact that we're in this age of COVID, the proliferation of hate crime, hate speech, and information we see over social media, over the email, through these cyber platforms, Zoom bombings. You guys all heard of Zoom. We use it. This is not the platform we're on, but our community has suffered these Zoom bombings where people come in, push out anti-Semitic tropes, violent rhetoric, sometimes even child pornography over these Zoom bombings in our community. We've seen that over the last 6 months. So we need to think about it and take this serious. And so we're an all hazards group. We think about all issues, not just security related issues, not just active shooter, but everything related to security. And everything I'm talking about, and I'm going to talk real fast because I really want to just talk about resources to provide you all at the end of the day. And so I had the ability, as the first communal security director in Pittsburgh, develop a communal security plan. We now do presentations of what happened at Tree of Life. And unfortunately, we suffered the loss, the greatest attack in our nation's history against our folks, where we lost 11 people. And I talk all over the country now to law enforcement, to our community about not why we lost 11 people, but why so many people survived. And it's all about preparedness and training. So what we've done from that one particular incident is we've taken survivor videos from Tree of Life, and we've really demonstrate why training matters, why security is important, why we need to have good sound policies. And so I just wanted to touch on that for a second. And we wanted to talk today about cybercrime, but before I go into that, we have a document that we have available to you, and it's I think one of the best documents that we put together at Secure Community Network, because we know security sometimes is limited by how much money we have at a conference. And so we devised a 9-page checklist and plan called Low Cost, No Cost Security Measures for Jewish Facilities and Jewish Events. You have access to that now. I encourage you all to download that. Take a look at it before you have an event. And really, it focuses on how to secure a facility, but it goes much deeper than that. So if we have an event, one of the most important things we can do as event organizers is really to talk about access control and that flow of people coming in and out of our building. So paramount to keep our people safe. If we access and limit access to our events and control the flow, have sign-ins, have some kind of vetting process, showing ID if we don't know who the folks are, it's really important that we take that extra step, and we can do this all at low cost, no cost. And that's why I wanted to share that document with you today. Even though it goes a little more granular in the security of our facilities, it really talks how to secure our operations. And for anybody that puts on an event like today, we think about security. Even over a cyber platform, we have to control who comes in and out of one of these chat rooms, one of these webinars, so we don't have an incident, so we don't, lose time or we have some kind of cyber intrusion. I encourage you to get that low cost, no cost. We talk about access control. We talk about coordinating with law enforcement. If you ever have an event, no matter where it's at, I encourage you all to let law enforcement know. Now, if you have a communal security director that's housed at one of our federations across North America, use him or her as a resource. I encourage you all to work with those security directors. If you don't know the community you're in, if you do not have a communal Jewish security director, let me know. I will tell you where the nearest one is or resources you can get from our headquarters level at Secure Community Network to help you out. But it's all about facilitating with law enforcement to really let them know the situational awareness that we are having a conference. We're going to rent out Temple Sinai in Cleveland, Ohio, and we need to keep ourselves as safe as possible. And I will tell you, coming from a law enforcement background from almost 30 years and working with the law enforcement community, they are very aware of the threat that the Jewish community faces, and they are there, and they provide free resources, free guidance, and then sometimes they will absolutely do drive-bys and sit in your parking lot if you can't afford security on the back end. So I encourage you all to always continually coordinate with law enforcement. And so really, when we talk about having a physical event within a building, the access control, having someone take control of security for that event, even if it's one of your event coordinators or a communal member, that we need to think about it and go through that checklist and items of things to secure that particular event. We do event threat assessments all the time. Every Yom Ha'atzmaut, every large Jewish gathering we have, we work with that organization to develop a threat assessment. Is anybody out there? We work with fusion and intelligence centers. So if you have an event, we can ask our intelligence centers, whatever city we're in, to actually scrub social media to see if anybody's talking about our publicly announced event. That's that engagement with law enforcement. I can't stress that anymore. So if we talk about cybersecurity, I just want to go through this relatively quick, especially in nonprofits. We really need to think from top down security. So starting with our own websites, our own Facebook pages, how secure are they? Who's looking at them? Who's monitoring them? One of the biggest gaps I see across the country right now is with cybersecurity. All our nonprofit organizations always have a Facebook site or an actual individual website, but who's monitoring that? How do we let people in? How much information is on here? Doug is going to talk to me about finances and financial security on the back end of this. One of the biggest gaps I see in every one of our nonprofit websites is we list everybody that's involved in that organization, to include financial officers, to include accountants. And what that leaves us with is the ability for hackers to identify who those folks are and actually groom people in this phishing expedition. And what I mean by phishing is this cyber intrusion where somebody just goes into our national website or our local regional website and they find out who that financial officer is or that accountant. And they'll send emails. And I'll give you an example. They might use Ken Bravo's email as it relates to the organization, to the genealogy association, right? And I can't say that word, and I apologize for that, folks. But now we change one little word or one character, and they will pose as Ken. And then they will go to a financial officer and say, Ken needs $500. He needs $1,000. Folks, that's a phishing expedition. And that's how nonprofits traditionally lose money. So I want you to be aware of that. I want you to really think about ways to keep those threat vectors, cyber threat vectors. That's the way hackers try to get into our systems at a minimum. And it all starts with really good cyber hygiene on our website and how we control our email, two-factor authentication for any kind of distribution of funds. And we really need to think through that. And look, we talk about ransomware, we talk about phishing, and this is not a cyber 101, and we could get a lot deeper into the weeds, but it's just about situational awareness with social media, emails, and website platforms, and how we really control that. So I encourage every one of you to learn a little more about this. We also have resources on the SCN website. When I'm off, I will put my email and contact information in the chat room. Please take it down. If you have further questions about security in your area or one of your events, please feel free to reach out to me. We are a 24/7 operation at Secure Community Network. I will tell you a little bit about our organization. We have intelligence analysts at our headquarters in Chicago. We have security directors all across the field, people like me from law enforcement, and we work together with our intelligence analysts to help keep your events secure. And that's really what we're talking about at the end of the day. So if we talk about cybersecurity, just really the basics with the few minutes I have is, don't make the mistake that probably, and I would venture to say 70% of Americans do, 70% of people do. They have weak passwords, and they use the password for their business and for their personal life. And I would guarantee most people on this call right now have the same password for the bank accounts, their sign in for social media and everything else. I encourage you not to do that. If we talk about social media and what we look for on social media, please be careful who you're sharing information from. We had this big thing on Facebook. I always say avoid the Facebook challenge, right? When we went into quarantine on COVID, and I'll just give you one example about this, and then I'll wrap it up. When 2020 high school graduates were out there, and you saw these challenges on Facebook, and they said, share your high school photograph, share your high school mascot, share where you went to high school. Folks, that is about one of the worst things you can do. You're actually putting personal identifiers out about how old you are, right? The year you graduated high school, the high school you went to, and you're giving hackers the ability to manipulate and actually steal information from you. So while social media is great to keep us all together during these strange times that we all live in, it's also fraught with disaster because there's people out there that continually try to engage and hack our systems. That's really so important. With that, I am happy to answer any questions you have about general security, cybersecurity, how to keep your events secure. And with that, I will turn it over to Ken to see if there's any questions that I may answer for any group.
Brad, thank you. Thank you for a wonderful, wonderful presentation. You covered a lot of material. I think it was very useful. Well, just note on your fishing example, Doug Cohn, my treasurer, routinely gets emails that purport to come from me asking that he send money someplace or another. Unfortunately, I have a very good treasurer who recognizes them for what they are. We have some questions. I want to run through them with you in the time that we have available. I have a question from Liz. Is there one safer platform for virtual events over another? We had Zoom bombings already.
Yeah, and that's a great question. Look, Zoom is a great outlet. It's very easy to use. Zoom is safe if you use the security protocols. So what I would recommend when you have an event, if you use Zoom, using the webinar style, have the ability to have a waiting room to really identify who's coming in and out of one of your events, have people name and check, and have somebody continually checking prior to letting somebody in. Now, if you have a Zoom bomb, look, folks, I will tell you there's active investigations from the FBI, from the organization I came to, on Zoom bombings across the country. Most of them have been benign, but there are a series of them that they are looking at as more hate crime, hate focused, but they all have different security platforms. I encourage you on how to use those platforms and use the security. Now, Zoom is actually enhancing their security platforms. They're going to have a whole new set of security protocols here in the next couple of weeks. They were actually going to do that in, I believe, the middle of July, but there was a lot of pushback, and they are going to have it. But there are protocols. And if you have any questions, particularly with Zoom or any other platform, please feel free to reach out to me, and I can walk you through the security protocols on each platform.
Thank you. We have a question from Evan. Our in-person events usually take place at synagogues. Should we coordinate with synagogue security people? Should we supplement synagogue security plan?
So I encourage you, absolutely. So if you're going to have a program at a synagogue, yes, coordinate with the synagogue. Understand what their security programs and platforms are. Ask them, be inquisitive. To ask them questions, do you have security cameras? Do you have good remote access control? Meaning they can let somebody in remotely without having somebody hold the door open for them. But yes, coordinate first with them. Typically, a lot of synagogues now, what I've seen is the increase of armed security, especially for events. I would encourage you, there's no magic formula, but if you have an event with over 50 folks gathering, and I know that's probably hard to do in most areas of the country, I think we need to think about having some type of physical security, whether it's armed or unarmed. But first, you have to go through that synagogue. But I also independently encourage you to work with the local police in the area to identify when and how many folks you're going to have in that synagogue as another protection for you.
Is the idea there, Brad, they will drive by during the event?
Oh, absolutely. The police are great with that. Look, it depends. Every synagogue is different. Some just literally do not have the money to hire that off-duty police officer, right? And I will tell you, when it comes to armed security, I encourage you all to think about it in two levels, only two levels. And that is an off-duty or on-duty police officer. That is the number one best armed security you can have for your money for a lot of reasons. One, they're the most highly trained. Two, that is direct connectivity. Even if they're off duty, they have a radio that they can bring resources there as quickly as possible. The second safest thing to do is to hire off-duty contract armed security. Not as good as police officers, but that's your second best choice. Now, that may be more cost effective for you, but if you had the choice of two armed security guards as opposed to one armed police officer, I would go with one police officer probably all the time because of the training and the connectivity that individual brings to that event and to that community, if that makes sense.
Okay. We have another question from Lisa, or Leah, I'm sorry. Does having a log in with a password make the site safer? I think she's talking about the society webpage and who can log into it.
Yes. You look, as much as you can control who's viewing your information, absolutely. So of course we have our standard website that we push information out to the community that's open to anybody. But a more intrusive look into our website, the better we can control access to, board of directors, real-time resources, or advertising where an event may be. I would highly suggest you secure that more, because we don't want to hide who we are. We don't want to hide any one event that we're doing, but we want to limit and mitigate intrusions from either online predators or people that might want to come to that event and do us harm. So yes, any kind of additional authentication to get in a website is absolutely encouraged.
Okay. I have a question from Lee. I believe this may be from Great Britain. I'm not sure. Yes. Our police don't carry firearms. How would you modify your advice in the UK or Europe?
Yeah, so that a completely different animal. And so, we have this debate all the time in the United States. And I will tell you, fortunately for you, Great Britain and Europe does not see the sheer amount of weapons and guns that we have in the United States. So security in the United States, and unfortunately in Canada, because the number of guns is increasing there. So let's just talk about, it's a lot less threatening, knowing that it's a lot harder for people in Great Britain or Europe to ascertain and gather really weapons that can really hurt a lot of people real quick. That does not negate the issue of good security. So I always recommend, especially in the Jewish community, we could be open yet secure. And what I mean by open and secure, we could still keep our front door locked at our synagogue, right? And still control access, but be open and welcoming, right? So it's all about access control. So if we go to Halle, Germany, what happened last year? So think about that attack alone. They had good security protocols there, but all they did was lock the door. And it was a big, heavy door. And they were able to use the resources inside that synagogue to see that the shooter was trying to gain access. Fortunately for that group, it was, I believe, just a shotgun, right? It wasn't an AR-15 that we saw in the Tree of Life shooting that's shooting out, a multitude of rounds in seconds, but it's just a shotgun. So it's all about buying time for us. So wherever you're at, whether you're in the United States, England, anywhere in Europe, we want to develop a plan where we buy time for our congregants and the folks we're having a meeting with until first responders get there. So we need to develop good security plans. And how we do it in the United States, we train our community to live 3 to 5 minutes. And that's kind of a response time for law enforcement. So now we train our community to live in those first 3 to 5 minutes in an attack. So when you're thinking about security platforms for a European English synagogue, it's going to look a little different, but the principles are the same. Buying time for our congregants before first responders get there.
Brad, we have about a minute left, and I have 2 questions I'm going to combine. Well, I see one of them went away. Our society has active social media. How would we know if we have been breached? And I saw another question. I don't see it now. It may have gone away, but it was, what about if one of our members has a carry license?
Yeah. So I will encourage you, with the Carry Kid sealed permit, please go onto our website at Secure Community Network, download Firearms and the Faithful. I will put that in the chat room when I'm done. I encourage you all to be very cautious and careful about well-meaning people, especially here in the United States, because anybody can pretty much carry a gun from state to state. I encourage you all to think carefully about that. There's a lot of perils and pitfalls with well-meaning people carrying a gun. I've carried a gun to work every day for 35 years. I train all the time. It's an awesome responsibility to carry a gun. I encourage you to look at that. I don't particularly condone it, but I also live in the real world. So if people do that, look at that. With the social media site, and the question was, how do we know if we're a breach? You're going to know once they start posting something. So once that happens, we need to report that to law enforcement. We need to identify that URL, work with our law enforcement partners. If you have that issue, please reach out to me. I know I'm talking really fast because I only have 10 seconds left. Ken?
Brad, thank you very much. This was most informative. I would encourage all our participants to download your handout. I would encourage them to look at your website and to contact you where appropriate. With that, let's move to part two. Our next speaker is Doug Cohn. Doug is a Boston native. He graduated from Harvard, received an MBA from Stanford. He has a master's degree in Judaic Studies from the Hebrew College in Boston. He's been a CFO for 4 companies and spent 15 years as a consulting CFO for smaller businesses. He's been researching his family for 20 years. He was the treasurer of his synagogue in Boston for 7 years. He's been treasurer of the JGS in Boston since 2012, and he was elected treasurer of the JGS in 2015. He also, as I mentioned previously, is the guy that protects me from fishing expeditions when people try and get him to send checks to somebody with phony emails that are purportedly from me. So with that, let me turn it over to Doug Cohn. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Ken. We're going to talk today about the JGS treasurer, the responsibilities, and the qualifications of the treasurer. When you go out looking for a volunteer to run an activity at your JGS, the first requirement that you have is that somebody raises hand, indicating a willingness to take on the task. For the treasurer role, willingness is not enough. The treasurer role requires a certain skill set, and the volunteer who takes that role must have accounting experience. Sometimes when you go looking for somebody with a financial background, you're going to end up with stockbrokers, financial analysts. At my synagogue, a person was put into this role because she was a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. They figured she must know something about numbers. It's not enough. To be the treasurer of a Jewish genealogical society, one needs debit and credit accounting experience. The person must have been a bookkeeper, a staff accountant, a controller, or something like that. One JGS recruited a retiree who had owned his own small business and had kept his own books on QuickBooks. That worked. We strongly recommend that each genealogical society do its accounting on a piece of desktop software called QuickBooks Pro. We do not recommend QuickBooks Online, which is a software as a service package. It's not as full-featured as the desktop version. Intuit, which is the company that produces QuickBooks, puts out a new version every year. There's very little difference from year to year, but the way that Intuit does it, a file produced on QuickBooks 2020 will not run on QuickBooks 2019, and that's their way to sell upgrades every year. You don't need an upgrade every year. Intuit continues to support each year's version for 3 years. But if you don't need to connect online to your bank or do online invoicing, you can continue to run your QuickBooks 2019 product for years and years and years. QuickBooks sells for about $300. Quicken, another Intuit product, is not an acceptable substitute. Quicken is a check printing system with very rudimentary reporting capabilities. You really do need QuickBooks. One of the handouts, which you can get under the Handout tab, is a typical genealogical society chart of accounts. A chart of accounts is a list of all the income, expense, asset, and liability accounts showing their hierarchy. For example, the main checking account and the money market account, if you have one, are both sub-accounts of the account cash. So they lines up automatically. Once your treasurer sets up QuickBooks, she or he should edit the QuickBook chart of accounts, adding and deleting accounts until she or he ends up with the typical chart that I've given you. Of course, it probably does need some customizing for your particular society, which may have a somewhat different activities than I've shown in the model chart. What does the treasurer do? The other handout is a typical job description for a genealogy society treasurer position. The first task of the treasurer is to prepare a budget. A budget is not a listing of the revenue and expense we received for the period, year, quarter, month. A budget is a plan made up in advance of what we expect the profit and loss statement to be. Usually we prepare a budget in advance of or at the beginning of the fiscal year. It can be simple. I mean, our budget could be to repeat exactly what we did last year and what's on last year's profit and loss statement. But it's usually better if the treasurer, working with the president and or the board, develop a plan for what we expect to happen in the new year. How much will there be in dues? How much in speaker honoraria? How much in room rental to the temple or the JCC or other place where meetings are held, assuming you have to pay for them? The budget should be entered into QuickBooks. The treasurer also has day-to-day responsibilities. She or he must receive the cash dues payments either from PayPal, cash mailed in to the P.O. box or at meetings, and the like. She or he must prepare bank deposits, and record the cash receipts into QuickBooks. If the payment is online, such as PayPal, it generally has to be entered into QuickBooks with a journal entry. The treasurer also pays approved bills. Depending on the size of your JGS, you may require that someone other than the treasurer approve expenses before the treasurer prints the check. It's best to print checks through QuickBooks, although the treasurer could also manually write the checks and then enter them into QuickBooks. Computer printed checks are not expensive. I buy mine through Costco, and I pay about $45 for 300 checks, which is a 3 to 5 year supply. An extremely important responsibility of the treasurer that I cannot emphasize too much is to reconcile the bank statements every month, using QuickBooks reconciliation process. Reconciling the bank statement is the only way to know if the QuickBooks records and the financial statements derived from them are accurate. For example, if the treasurer received some dues payments at a meeting, deposited them in the bank, but forgot to record the deposit in QuickBooks, the bank statement won't reconcile and the missing deposits will be obvious. Financial statements produced without this reconciliation will be wrong. She or he can make the entry and complete the reconciliation. Reconciling monthly prevents errors. It's a good control practice for someone other than the treasurer to review the reconciliations periodically after they've been done. Any small societies feel that this step is not necessary. It is a good control practice. Periodically, quarterly, semi-annually, the treasurer should use QuickBooks reporting functions to print out a budget versus actual P&L for the year to date. The president or the board should review the report to see how you're trending against your plan. Then you can determine if you need to take action to fix an unfavorable trend. It's also my practice at IAJGS to distribute a list of all disbursements to the board every 6 months in the interests of transparency. Everyone can see where all the money has been going. Another task of the treasurer is to prepare state and federal tax returns, and we'll come back to that in a minute. A further very important task is to make the annual membership renewal to IAJGS and pay the annual fee. This is due on January 1st and overdue on March 1st. The renewal is an online form which creates an entry directly into the IAJGS membership database. Because JGS officers change on a regular basis, it's hard for us to keep up with who's who. By each JGS is doing this renewal online, we get the most recent names and email addresses every January. The form also allows the treasurer, the JGS treasurer, to pay the annual fee, 50 cents per member, $18 minimum, either by PayPal, credit card, or sending me a check. Annual renewal has 2 parts: filling out the form and paying the fees. The form also allows societies to make a donation to the Stern Award Fund and the Travel Fund. We also use the information to produce an annual listing of our JGSs. Last year we printed it in a book and distributed it at the president's reception at the conference. Well, we're not all together this year, so we plan to distribute this listing electronically to the presidents in the next few weeks. Next year, we think we will ask for the president's phone number as well, and for permission to publish that phone number in the directory so that other society presidents and IAJGS officers can more easily communicate with you. I want to turn now from the treasurer's role to a few comments on legal organizations. This has been confusing to some of our JGSs, and I've had a number of phone calls from some of you. All of our JGSs are required by our bylaws to be nonprofit entities and to so indicate in their bylaws. Entities come in 3 flavors: corporations, limited liability companies, and informal associations. A corporation is a creature of state law. It's formed by an application to the Secretary of your state, who asks for a fee, and who issues a charter establishing your corporation. A limited liability company is also a creature of state law. Note that it's a limited liability company, not a limited liability corporation. It is an unincorporated entity. This also requires an application to the Secretary of State. In most states, a corporation or an LLC must file an annual report with the Secretary of State and pay an annual fee. They do get fees, don't they? Nonprofit corporations and LLCs usually also have to file with another branch of government. Could be the state attorney general, somebody who is responsible for nonprofits. The fees are very, very reasonable. They're not very much. In Massachusetts, for example, total annual fees are $50. In New Jersey, they've gone up to $90. An informal organization doesn't register with the state or anybody else. It's just a group of people. From a legal point of view, corporations and LLCs have limited liability. So if someone sues the organization, they're suing just the organization, not the people. In an informal association, they would be suing officers or the people who would be liable for the actions of the association. In addition, an informal association cannot reserve a name. If you are the JGS of XYZ, not incorporated, not an LLC, and someone else applies to the Secretary of State for the name JGS of XYZ Inc., that entity gets the name, and you have to stop using it. In order to open a bank account, you need to have a taxpayer identification number, an EIN. If you Google applying for an EIN, you'll find a link to an IRS website which allows you to fill out Form SS4 online and get an EIN immediately. You used to have to get a paper form, send it in, and several weeks later you got it back. Now it's immediate. None of this entity discussion has anything to do with 501c3. That's a subsection of the federal, not state, Internal Revenue Code relating to tax-exempt entities. A 501c3 entity is exempt from federal tax, and contributions to it, like dues, are usually deductible to the donors. Rather than apply to the IRS for an exemption, members of JGS, who are US-based, can apply to us to be included in our 501c3 registration, provided that your fiscal year is December 31. Send me an email if you want to do this. Note that an informal association cannot receive a 501c3 exemption. In addition, in many, but not all, states, a 501c3 entity can usually obtain an exemption from state sales taxes. JGSs must file a federal tax return every year. Tax-exempt entities file Form 990. If your annual gross receipts are usually less than $50,000, and usually to the IRS means a 5-year rolling average, you can file Form 990N, the so-called postcard form. But it's not a postcard. It's an online form which asks about 8 questions. Name, address, are you still in business, name of principal officer, total receipts. After you've gone through the one-time registration process, it takes less than 5 minutes every year to file, and there's no fee. But it's very important. If you fail to file Form 990N for 3 years running, the IRS will take away your tax-exempt status, and it's very hard to get it back. The form is due by the 15th day of the 5th month after your fiscal year, May 15th for December 31 entities. I send a reminder every year in mid-April to all US-based JGS treasurers, at least those who've given us their email addresses in the annual renewal, so that they're reminded to file the form. So that concludes my discussion of the treasurer's role, qualifications, and responsibilities. My phone number and email address are in the handout. For you or your treasurer, should feel free to contact me. Please don't text, as a resource if you need it. Please fill out the evaluation form on the app, and I'd be happy to take questions.
Doug, thank you very much. Wonderful presentation, and let me read you a question I have here. If an organization files through IAJGS, how do they safeguard their name as they don't have an individual filing with the state? What if they have a website with that name and someone claims it at the state? I ask because we have a similar relationship with a Jewish history organization.
Oh, that's a great question. I'm very glad that this person asked. 501c3 exemption has nothing to do with the state, with state law. You are incorporated or become an LLC through state law. That's how you get the name. 501c3, which you can get through us, is a completely separate subject. In one case, we're talking about tax. In another case, we're talking about legal organization. Did I answer the questions?
I believe so. Okay, let me give you another one, though.
Ask again if it's not enough.
Okay. How many signatures should we require on checks?
Well, that's up to the individual JGS. The bank generally will not check for how many signatures, even though you may fill out a form that says it requires 2 signatures. The bank is not going to check, and they will just pass it through. Some of my corporate clients who write larger checks have a printed on the above the signature block on the check, checks over $500, $1,000, $10,000, whatever, require 2 signatures. So that way, the person who receives it kind of does the checking for you. But that's really up to what the organization needs and the size of the organization.
Okay. Next question. Our treasurer posts income and expenditure records monthly in our Dropbox. Is this safe?
Well, Brad can help on that one, but really, it depends how secure your Dropbox account is. You do want to share that information with members of the board. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, but from a security point of view, Dropbox is organized with passwords, and they would tell you they're pretty secure.
Okay. How do you feel about having a qualified outside individual to handle the books with daily deposits, checks, etc., being handled by the JGS treasurer?
Well, that's kind of splitting the responsibilities. And so long as the person is competent, and so long as all of the tasks that I described are done, whether it's done by one person or shared by 2, probably shouldn't matter, so long as they keep up on a daily basis or weekly basis. It becomes a big problem if one person is doing one of these tasks and not communicating to the other person, or the other person doesn't keep up. You're going to get out of balance.
Okay. We have a follow-up question from the person who asked about protecting the name. We use another organization as our fiscal agent, so they have the nonprofit filing. How do we then secure our name?
The name is not part of the nonprofit filing. The name is part of the state registration. I would encourage that person to give me a call and let's chat a little bit more.
Okay. Should we require an audit of our books each year?
Well, an audit to a financial person is a very specific list of tasks done by a person or entity licensed by the state And it's very hard to get an audit done for less than $20,000 or $25,000 a year. So I don't recommend that.
Is there something less onerous in terms of?
Yeah, there are a couple of less onerous processes. Again, some of them done by outside audit firms, none of which I recommend. But sunlight is the best disinfectant. Having somebody else look at the board should be looking at the financial statements, and that's an important benefit of the budget versus actual review that I recommended a couple of minutes ago. You will see pretty quickly. We know that we're going to have six speakers this year, and we pay each of them $100. So our budget for speakers is $600. If the financial statement shows $900 being spent, then something's wrong somewhere.
Okay. Should our treasurer be bonded?
Well, a crime bond is going to cost probably a couple of $1,000s a year. Depending on the size of your organization, that may be a significant part of your budget. And you have to look at the cost and the benefit.
Okay. Another question I have is, my JGS is changing its bylaws to allow electronic payment. What are the most secure and efficient ways to do this?
I guess I don't know very many ways other than Dropbox. The JGS of Boston has a system, and I'm just pulling a blank on its name, which is a customer relations management database that allows people to make payments. Ultimately, the treasurer has to make a journal entry picking up the amount that has been paid electronically and entering it into QuickBooks.
Okay. There's a question here about suggestions for fundraising, but I think that's beyond the scope of your talk. And then one of our attendees has PayPal and Square for electronic payments. Do you have any experience with those?
Yeah, they both work just fine. They will both get money into your bank account. Well, Square will get money into your bank account. PayPal gets money into your PayPal account, which you can then transfer to the bank account. But you got to stay up. The treasurer has got to stay up to date with these transactions, entering them as they happen, because otherwise you get out of sync.
All right. Somebody else has added in that same category, wild apricot. Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not.
Okay. You mentioned the treasurer getting in touch and renewing at the beginning of the year and giving you the information. The question is, so we give you the names on January 1st of our president and treasurer, but then we have elections a couple months later, and now we have somebody new. How do we communicate that information?
Email both the secretary and me, and I will update our list. If we publish our directory at the end of August, and you have somebody new on October 1st, that person's not going to be in this year's directory, but we'll pick it up next January 1st.
Bottom line is,
let us know. We do our
And
best
we
to
have
try to
1
keep
minute
the least
left.
up to date.
Okay, we have 1 minute left. I have one question left. Sometimes the treasurer serves two organizations and gets us mixed up with the other. Should we prohibit our treasurer from working for two groups?
Well, if the person's getting mixed up, I think it would be good to not to permit it.
Ken, I'm sure I'm going to shut down the meeting.
Okay, thank you all very much. If any one of the attendees has suggestions for other things they would like to hear, please let me know. And also in 15 minutes, there's another session. It's going to be on getting volunteers and using various software. Thank you all very much for attending. Have a great conference.
Bye-bye.
Bye all.